English translation. 349th contact. Wednesday, 12th of November, 2003, 1.48 hours.
Ah, be welcome and greeted, Ptah, my dear friend. I am glad to see you.
Since Florina, Bernadette, and you are not doing any correction work tonight, I want to take the opportunity to visit. Be greeted, my friend.
With your permission, I would like to start off by saying a few words about something I would like your opinion on. Here, these 2 letters and these copy pages of a book I received from a Mr. Wellner, with the request to tell him whether I consider the whole thing to be real or fictional. I, for my part, have already taken 61 pages of the book to mind, and find that it is very imaginative, but childishly stupid and fictitious, by a person who somehow suffers from feelings of inferiority, feels set back and somehow seems very immature.
Ptah reads for a long time 2 letters from EGAP Deutschland and various documents.
The statements made in this report are not only highly implausible and unrealistic, but also correspond to clear and undoubtedly freely invented falsehoods and wild, childish fantasies without any real background. Furthermore, the incredibly stupid and audacious assertions contain such blatant excesses of contradictions that even a person who is uneducated in this field must recognize the uncredibility of the whole story. Just looking at the claim concerning the celestial body, Aldebaran shows such ignorance and stupidity that I blush with shame when I think of a grown man publicly spreading such nonsense. Aldebaran is, on the one hand, as you yourself know very well, an already very far expanding and decaying star, which has only an inherent heat of hardly 5,000 degrees Celsius and no more energy and power to guarantee higher, let alone human or human-like life on any planet. And furthermore, you know this as well as we do, because we also let you see this star, its nearer and farther surroundings, and the entire Taurus region on your great journey. There are no solid matter planets in the entire Aldebaran system, only gas planets, which do not and could not carry any higher life apart from bacterial life. So there is also no planet called Aryan or inhabitants who would call themselves Aryan, who are also supposed to be distant relatives of the Earth humans. These assertions alone are so nonsensical that I have to ask myself whether the man who invented these dubious stupidities is still in his right mind. And when I read your already prepared answers to Mr. Wellner here, I must agree with them in every respect. However, you can add a little more to them, for which I will later give you some details that you can integrate into your answers. But now we should not talk about it any further, because in all the nonsense of what is written there is no value at all.
Then you mean that this work, what is it called? Ah, yes, My UFO Experience on Rugen, written under the pseudonym Martin Wiesengrün, is completely worthless. As you can see from my already written partial answer, I am of the same opinion as you. According to your information, I will complete the answer. But there is still the question regarding Adamski. Mr. Wellner is asking about it, as you can see here in his letter. Should I remain silent on the question or answer it partially or openly?
A free and open answer might be appropriate because the questioner seems to be honestly interested in it.
And what can I say about Menger?
I answer in such a way that, as with Adamski and others, I have personally seen them filming and photographing flying apparatus models suspended from trees and between buildings by thin threads, which should have represented extraterrestrial flying apparatuses, and passing them off as real and publicizing them worldwide.
Well, then I do not have to give a separate answer. I just have to add the conversation excerpt from your statement you just made to my reply to Mr. Wellner.
You can do that? I agree with that.
And how about you could pass me the interview with Adamski literally from your notes?
The conversation with George Adamski was unforeseen and therefore not recorded by Ascot. Therefore, I cannot repeat the exact word order to you and also cannot transmit it later. For my part, I can correct you at most on the basis of the information provided by Ascot because she told me the whole event.
Well, let me see if I can still put it together after all this time. If something does not correspond to the events of that time, then please correct me. It was in the late 50s or the beginning of the 60s when this charlatan Adamski gave a show in Zurich at the Volkshaus, Helvetiaplatz, with very strange 8mm films and weak, ridiculous-looking explanations. Interested in the show myself, I contacted Ascot, who was present when I attended the Adamski lecture together with Paul Christen and 3 others, of whom I only know their first names, Kurt, Eddie, and probably Eric. So I bought a ticket, saw his films, and listened to his speech, which was translated into German by a translator. For my part, I had borrowed a translator from the extraterrestrial Ascot, who was also present herself, although she remained invisible to all present due to the technology of her light deflection capability, which also deflects and redirects radar beams. Unfortunately, the translators did not do their duty correctly, which disturbed me as well as the audience, who became quite displeased. Unfortunately, I cannot remember many details, because it is more than 40 years ago, but I remember that long before the lecture, Ascot explained to me that Adamski's claims were made from thin air and that his UFOs were nothing more than models. During the lecture, Ascot and I agreed that I should have a conversation with George Adamski after the film and the explanations were finished, and confront him with the truth of the fact that all his films were made with models, and that his whole story was just his imagination for the purpose of being famous and traveling the world, etc. But since I did not know English at that time, I had to rely on Ascot's translator, which then served me well. Around 23:30 hours, when the audience had left, I approached Adamski and asked him for a very important personal interview, without the audience being present. He agreed to this, for 15 minutes as he promised. However, it must be said that Ascot's suggestive impulses were necessary. So we went into a small room, Ascot, of course, going along unnoticed, where I confronted him and accused him of fraud and charlatanry, which he, of course, vehemently denied. So I resorted to the remedy that Ascot had suggested to me, namely that I could prove to him that he could prove the whole of his claims only from his fingers, explaining to him that I myself had been in contact with extraterrestrials since my childhood, and that an extraterrestrial was invisibly present in the room, and that she was not well disposed to his swindles. He reacted angrily, became loud, and hissed that my words were only nonsense, because there was nothing trivial. Then I asked him how he would behave if Ascot, who had been invisible until then, suddenly appeared in the room. And again he hissed that there could not be such a thing. And that was exactly the moment when Ascot switched off her light redirection device and appeared out of nowhere right in front of Adamski. Pale as chalk and frightened, he opened his eyes and was unable to utter a word. It may have taken him 2, 3, or even 4 minutes to get his bearings, and he stutteringly asked Ascot, dressed in a spacesuit, where she came from and who she was. Of course, she explained the whole context to him, but I cannot remember the details, which led Adamski to apologize to me and explain that I was right with my accusation against him. But he had brought everything up big, and now he could not go back, etc., because otherwise he would make himself impossible all over the world. I do not remember what he said, except that he said that he always felt very alone, and that he had therefore sought the way through the alleged UFOs and contacts with equally alleged extraterrestrials. That in order to get in contact with people who should admire him, to which he also used his strong suggestive powers to cast a spell on people. Finally, we were then more than half an hour in the room, when suddenly there was a knocking at the door, whereupon Ascot switched on her cloaking device again in a flash and was absolutely invisible. Then a woman came in who wanted to pick Adamski up and asked if we were finally finished, which I answered with yes, after which I left wordlessly and never heard anything from Adamski personally again. Unfortunately, I cannot remember anything more, at least not the exact details of the conversation, neither from myself nor from Adamski or Asket.
Your account is correct in every respect, and that you are unable to remember the details of the conversation after so many years is only understandable, because even I am not able to do so, although my memory is as well trained as yours. Details of sentence formations, etc. would have to be recorded and available to me as well as to you. If the contact conversations between you and us had not been literally recorded on our side, also between my father Svath, Asket, and you, then it would not have been possible to transmit everything to you afterwards, literally in such a wise that you could implement it correctly and form it literally. The truth is that after only a few minutes, the normal person can no longer repeat verbatim what he has said or what others have said. We are much better in this respect, but the more time goes by, the less we are able to repeat what has been said, written, or read word for word. But if something is to be preserved verbatim, then it must either be written down or recorded with appropriate technical means.
Then I am reassured. Thanks. Here I have a newspaper article of the Landboten from 24th September 2003. Please read it and tell me what you think about it. They say that this year, 2003, was the hottest summer in 500 years.
This is absolute nonsense, because as we have already talked about it, our records prove that 1947 was the hottest summer in Europe for hundreds of years. It was 47 degrees Celsius at the time.
I know that because I experienced it myself. But some firecrackers just know everything better and rely on extremely faulty meteorological records.
Unfortunately, nothing can be done about it, because the dogmatic ones insist on the wrong records and their stupid opinions.
Just typical Earth humans. What do you think about the situation in Iraq, Afghanistan, Israel, and Palestine, and the attacks in Istanbul?
You have already talked with Florina about it and expressed your opinion, which is absolutely correct. But everything will come much worse. The blame for this lies with warmongers like the U.S. President George W. Bush, the English Tony Blair, and the Israelite Sharon, as well as all those who pull the same rope with them or even approve of them and their actions. All the terrorism of the state powers and their minions, the secret services and the military, will, just like the terror organizations that have spoken out, such as Al-Qaeda, etc., cause such disaster worldwide as has never happened on the earth since time immemorial. And if Bush, Blair, and Sharon and their fanatical supporters are not freed from their positions or follow these warmongers with similar creatures, then a worldwide war catastrophe will befall the earth and its humanity. Yet the rationality of the earth human can prevail when all people stand together as one and throw the criminal state powers from their positions to replace them with peace-loving, worthy and reverent directed forces. If that does not happen, then everything will come to a bad end. The USA are world domination addicted and spread like evil vermin over the world. The military and U.S. Americans in general have to retreat from all over the world to the United States, as well as the English to England, while Israel has to give the Arabs back their land. Such action alone can calm down and bring international terrorism to a standstill, regardless of whether it emanates from the USA, England, Israel, or actual terrorist networks. In fact, it is always only a few state powers, including the USA and Israel, who exercise state terror through the forces of the secret services and the military and all their supporters, while the majority of the respective people are committed to peace, freedom, and life. The great criminals of humanity are therefore not the masses of the peoples, but a few completely irresponsible state powers and their followers and practitioners, who are warmongers and unscrupulous murderers and plunge their peoples into death, distress, and misery and destroy everything. But it is incomprehensible that the peoples put up with this, subordinate themselves to the criminals, and do not rise up against the murderous dictators. And such dictators are also those murderous state powers who are elected by the people and abuse their power for war and state terrorism, murder, and destruction. And in Iraq, there will probably only be peace when the civilian and military USA power, as well as the English and the UN forces, withdraw and leave the country. If that does not happen, then everything will continue as before, with not only numerous military personnel losing their lives, but also UN forces, embassy staff, members of aid organizations, terrorists, suicide bombers, innocent women, children and men, reporters, tourists, as well as guerrilla fighters who are defending themselves against the occupying forces.
As things stand now, your words could come true. Such damned scoundrels and warmongering, terrorist criminals of humanity, such as those currently at the helm of various states with their criminal secret services and military, as well as the primitive criminals of humanity of the open terrorist organizations, disregard all human rights, human dignity, and humanity. However, I wanted to ask one more thing. In the 1980s, Quetzal and I talked about diseases that affect people on Earth. There was also talk of AIDS, and I would like to ask whether a really effective drug to combat it has not finally been found. Quetzal also said that the epidemic will last for a long time and claim millions of lives. Neither one nor the other is being heard from.
Unfortunately, it will be a long time before a really effective drug is created that can actually influence the epidemic in such a manner that a cure is found. Thus, the epidemic continues to spread unstoppably throughout the world, causing thousands of deaths every day and millions every year. On the one hand, this is due to the fact that humans have overcome the initial horror of the epidemic and for some time have again become very careless and negligent with regard to sexual practices. The normal sexual life between the two sexes has degenerated into a commercial prostitution business as well as into a kind of adulterous sex lust, whereby many marriage partners cheat on each other sexually with other partners. Depending on the country, such adulteries vary between 40 and 60%, whereby in the percentage of 10, children of their partners are also imputed to their adulterous misdeeds and relationships. This refers both to alliances that exist through official decisions and stipulations, as well as to those alliances that exist without an official certificate.
By official, you probably mean the civil registry office, and by the other one the concubinage, as it is called in our country. This is a marital community without official marriage. Originally it was the Latin concubinatus, a legally permitted extramarital community for people who could not enter into a civil or official marriage under Roman law, such as those freed from serfdom or servitude. Shamefully, in Switzerland this is still called concubinage and not free marriage community. In addition, in Switzerland it was a punishable offense to live together in this wise as man and woman in the case of a fine. It is only a few years ago that the canton of St. Gallen, for example, abolished the ban on concubinage. Unfortunately, I do not know whether it still exists in other Swiss cantons. And with regard to women who foist children on their husbands who are not their own, we call such children cuckoo children.
Interesting, I did not know that. But it is understandable if you know that the cuckoo uses foreign nests and throws the eggs out of them to lay its own egg, which is then hatched by the actual nest owners, and the young is then raised by them. But now I wonder if you have a term for illegitimate children. That should actually be the case.
Of course, there is an old word for it, bastard. Only most people do not know it anymore, which is why they often say child and bastard when they talk about children, but have no idea that they are talking about legitimate and illegitimate children. The saying has become so common through tradition that the actual meaning is hardly known anymore.
In the German language, there are many words in use today whose original meaning is no longer known. For my part, I own 3 so-called dictionaries of origin, some of which, however, are extremely faulty in reproducing the real origin of the word.
Yes, I know. But unfortunately, it cannot be changed, because the scribes have a different opinion. Now, I have another question concerning the subatomic levels, of which there are 7 in all, as far as I know. Can you give me the names of them?
I would have to change the terms from our language to yours, because our terms would not help you.
Of course.
Good. For your understanding, I will first give you our names of the different levels, which I will translate literally into the German language, so that I can attach to each term the meaning according to your language in relation to the subatomic and sub-subatomic levels. The 7 levels which are called Raylan in our language are called Cadanralin subatomic, Surinralin supersubatomic, Naniralin nanatomic, Naniaralin subnanatomic, Licknanralin supernanatomic, Delralin molatomic, and Glanralin quantatomic.
Thank you. That is enough and helps me out.
Then I would like to talk to you about things that are of a purely private nature, and should therefore only be discussed in confidence.
Of course.